We are mandated to investigate allegations of child abuse and neglect. We ensure the safety of children, and our goal is to prevent further abuse and neglect in the home, and we do this by providing services to the family. And our goal is to preserve family life by enhancing parental capacity. That's what we hope to achieve when we work with families. In Fairfax, we have a 24-hour hotline, and we have a local hotline, which is located, I don't know if you know where the government buildings are, at the Panino building there by Fair Oaks Mall. We have a local government that sits there, or the local hotline, sorry, that sits there. And they consist of about 8 workers. Most of them are part-time workers, and they answer phones pretty much throughout the day for us. And they are screening our phone calls, and then they'll make the decisions to whether or not we take a case. They also have a supervisor for that unit. When the local hotline closes down, we have a state hotline, so our phones will roll to the state hotline. So if you're making a phone call to Child Protective Services, you can either speak with a local hotline, or you might work with a state hotline. And the one way you'll know the difference is the local hotline is going to give you their name, their phone number. The state hotline is going to give you a number, their worker number. They don't give out their names and things like that. So that's how you tend to know the difference too. If you're speaking and it's a little bit more informal and relaxed, it's probably the local hotline that you're speaking with. The number that we have to call if you are calling to make an abuse and neglect referral is the same to whether or not you're calling the local or the state, because the phones roll over to the state. And that number is 703-324-7400. And we did give an outline for you guys as well to follow us with our PowerPoint presentation. And feel free to ask questions as we go along. If you have something that comes up at the time, please ask us now. You don't need to wait till the end of the presentation, because by then it might not make sense to everybody at that point when we've moved on to a new topic. So feel free to ask us questions. We are going to try to be interactive and try to have you guys participate if you can. But you don't have to if you don't want to. We're not going to force your hand to do so. But in Fairfax County as well, we have what we consider mandated reporters. And as CASA workers, you are mandated to report any suspicion of child abuse. And a suspicion of child abuse means that you don't need evidence that the abuse is occurring. It just has to be that something's off. You have a gut feeling that something's off, and that is your obligation then at that point to call Child Protective Services and make a report. And when you make a report to Child Protective Services as mandated reporters, we ask that you give out your information of who you are, who you work with, a phone number that they can reach you at. This information is not given to the families, but it's important that the social worker, if the case is assigned to them, that they have the opportunity to speak to the person who's making that call to Child Protective Services, because a lot of times they may have additional questions for you. But as the law, the person who makes the report to Child Protective Services, their name is protected, and that information is not given out to the families. There are times that the name is divulged, and that's usually in court cases, because the case will start with who contacted Child Protective Services, and sometimes the families can figure it out. That's up to them to make guesses, but we're not going to provide them with that information. So a mandated reporter are those persons who are required to report child abuse. As I said, CASA workers. Who are some other mandated reporters that you can think of in the community? Teachers. Physicians. Exactly. Law enforcement, nurses, social workers, probation officers, all those people, individuals who work in the mental health field, they're mandated to make a report to child abuse when they suspect it. We ask that the law basically says that you have 72 hours to make a report to the Child Protective Services hotline when you get that suspicion of that abuse is occurring. We ask that you don't wait till the 72nd hour to call us. And the reason we ask that is because by waiting till the last minute to call us, you might have left a child at risk in a home. In addition, if there's marks, In 72 hours, those marks may not be there any longer. So for any person, whether it's a mandated or a community person within the community calling, we ask that you not wait. When you feel that something's wrong and you want to make that report, call us immediately. Don't wait the 72 hours, even though you have that leeway to make that call. You disclose all information, as I said. Usually the worker on the hotline worker will ask you questions, and you just answer them as best as you can. If you don't know the information, you don't know it, and that's okay. Failure to report, there is a consequence, and individuals can be fined for not reporting. You can lose a job for not reporting, and there's also, you can be taken to court for not reporting. So there are consequences. So we ask that as mandated reporters, if you immediately get a report to us as quickly as possible, and let us decide whether or not any further action is to be taken. We don't want to leave that on anybody and that burden on anybody. Any questions with regards to mandating reporters? Yes.
Do we call the hotline, or do we call our supervisor first, or?
CASA probably has their own protocol to how that, I know like teachers do, they have a protocol to how it goes down, and I think CASA, you guys, I don't know if you do as well, if you're asked to notify your supervisor first. I think that's something that you guys need to discuss.
Sure, just to speak to it real quickly, you can always discuss it with us, but we're going to tell you to call the hotline or to notify your CPS worker on the case.
Before we call you?
You can call us first if you'd like, but if it's something that's severe and needs to be done within a matter of, it's timely, be sure to call the hotline.
I guess if you can't reach them, don't delay is probably what, if you can reach them and it's during business hours and you want to make that phone call to your supervisor, that's fine, but just don't delay if you can't reach them. All right, any other questions with regards to that, to mandated reporters? Okay. When a call is made to Child Protective to the hotline, there are certain criteria that have to be met in order for it to be taken as a case. And we field many calls throughout the day that may not be child abuse cases, people just needing resources in the area, looking for daycare and things like that. So the hotline might be taking a lot of phone calls, but when it comes to meeting the criteria for abuse and neglect, there are 4 criteria that have to be met in order for us to take a case and assign it to a worker. Or as a second, if there's already an open case on a family, we have to determine whether that's a second referral for us. And the first criteria is that the alleged abuser needs to be in a caretaker role. And that means that they need to be taking care of a child and in that capacity of caring for a child, whether it be a parent, a babysitter, a teacher who is responsible for taking care of the children when they're in their care. That is where a caretaker has to come in. We have to have that person as a caretaker. We can have also, as I said, babysitters are considered caretakers, and we have teenager babysitters. So if something happens when a teenager is babysitting a younger child, they can be seen as alleged abusers as well. And we have babysitters as young as 13 years old, and they may be looked at as alleged abusers in a case. We also have what we consider assumed caretakers, and those are individuals who are living in the child's home, whether it be relatives who are living in the home, or if a parent has a tenant living in a home, renting out a room. We assume that they are caretakers and that they are supposed to keep kids safe because they're within the household. So that's the first criteria. It has to meet that we have to have the alleged abuser needs to be in a caretaker role. Second criteria is that we have to have a child between the ages of birth and 18 years old. Anything past 18, it's actually just below 18. Once the child turns 18, it's no longer a Child Protective Services case, and that's when the police will most likely investigate if there's been an assault or something like that. But Child Protective Services is not mandated to investigate that if the child is 18. What would be a circumstance to why we might get involved with a birth following the birth of a baby?
They didn't feed the baby.
Sorry?
They weren't feeding the baby, or what do you mean?
Just like right after birth, like we get a call, baby's a few days old. Drug addicted. feeding, you can sometimes see if the baby's been there for a few days and the mom is not attaching or not feeding the baby. We can get calls like that as well. But the biggest one that we're going to get if it's a newborn baby is typically it's a drug-exposed baby. The other one is if the nurses or the doctors notice that that the mother's mentally ill and showing signs of some sort of mental illness, we may get called on that as well for a newborn. All right, so we have a caretaker role. We have the child between birth and just up to 18. We also have to have the third criteria that it has to meet. It has to be within our jurisdiction, within Fairfax County. And Fairfax County, we have it a little different. We have two ways that we can meet jurisdiction. And one is if the child resides in our area or if the abuse occurred in our area. And that's how we can get jurisdiction of a case. And then the last criteria is it has to meet the definition of abuse and neglect. And that is probably our grayest area. And that is where interpretation sometimes comes into play. And we have the gray line where we're kind of said, does it meet abuse and neglect? Is it not abuse and neglect? We do have policy, which we'll go over, that gives the definitions of types of abuse and neglect. And we'll go over that in a little bit. Yes?
Do you assume everything we tell you is true when you make that judgment call? Or whatever is said in the phone call, do you assume all of it's true to determine if it meets that?
I would say yes, we would have to. We don't know you, so we're hoping that you're giving us truthful information. So we're not going to make a judgment at that time whether this is truthful or not truthful information. That's for the investigation, and once we get looking into the case to determine whether or not the allegation is true or not.
And that's why they're considered allegations. You're not calling in saying that their abuse is happening. It's an allegation of abuse and neglect. And it's up to the worker to look into the situation to find out to validate what the report or what the caller said and to determine if it's valid or if there's other issues going on or both.
Yes,
What about drug or alcohol abuse of the unborn child? Is that outside of your jurisdiction? Is that another department's concern?
if the child's not born yet
Not
and
born, but you see a
we
mother.
can't take it.
We do get calls on that.
Does anyone take that, or?
No.
So Virginia does. I guess that's a legal question. Is the unborn child not considered a?
It's not considered a child, right, until the birth. I know hospitals sometimes they can red flag those, like say, and when the birth of the baby occurs, they can then call us in. I know, like Fairfax Hospital, they have a computer system that kind of red flags cases where they're concerned about the fetus and the health of the child, and so what they do is they wait till the birth and then they'll give us a call. Or they've called us already and we've got it up, and it stays in our system for up to a year. It stays in our system for a year. So, even though a report may not have been taken, it will stay in our system for a year. And so we can see if other people have called in and had concerns on the family. Any other questions?
I assume you get called for abandonment of unborn.
Yes.
Also.
And the law does protect individuals who choose to abandon their children in a safe haven. There's the safe haven laws. If they do it at a hospital or at a police station, I think our safe haven laws protect the parents from prosecution. I don't believe church is on there because I want to say no, just because I think there's been situations where babies have been left at the doorsteps of churches and have passed away, not knowing that they have to be designated safe havens. I know the police stations and the hospitals are safe havens. There might be others in different communities, but those are the ones that are recognized. Any other questions? All right. Just to kind of before we go into the definitions, and I probably should have done this when I was talking about the hotline, but there are about 50 social workers in Fairfax County, and that includes social workers who do intake, which are investigating cases of abuse and neglect and looking into or doing family assessments. And I'll go into the difference a little later between the two, of an investigation and a family assessment. So that includes intake workers as well as ongoing workers. And I believe you guys get a presentation on ongoing work, so I won't go into that. But so just so you know, there are about 50, and there's dual responsibilities within those units, both intake and ongoing. And there's also fire team workers, which Josh works for the fire team program, and he'll tell you guys a little bit about that probably. But we have 5 units within the county. We are regionalized, which means that the county, we are such a large county that there are units that only deal specifically with certain areas. We have a central unit, which is located there by the Fair Oaks Mall, which deals with cases that come in from Fairfax and Centerville. And you guys don't necessarily have to know where to call your, which unit your case is going to, just so you know that there are different units within the county. When you call, you are going to be calling the hotline, and they will distribute your case to where it needs to go, to the appropriate unit. But just so you know, we do have a central unit. We also have a Reston Herndon unit, and we have a Falls Church unit. There's 2 units down in South County, and we have 2 specialized units, one being the sex abuse unit, and I believe somebody from sex unit will also come talk to you guys. And then we have the after hours unit, which is the unit that Josh and I are in. And the unit, even though we're called after hours, we don't come in and work at night. We're not night owls like most people would think we are. We do work typically a 9 to 5 job. The only difference is the after hours, our cases are coming in the evening. So instead of the daytime, like all these other units that I mentioned, their cases are coming in during 8 and 4:30 Monday through Friday during the daytime. After hours will take all the cases that come in after those hours and on the weekend. So we're on call. We have 2 social workers on call a night who are screening cases and responding if there is a crisis. The after hours unit does have to respond if there is an emergency. So it could be 2 in the morning and we just got a call from Fairfax Hospital with a baby that's got a skull fracture, and meaning that we're going to need to respond, get out of our bed, get dressed, and respond out and look our best. So that's the difference between the after hours and the daytime units. Any questions with regards to the units dispersed amongst the county? Okay, we're moving on. And I tend to talk fast, so you can slow me down if you need to. The definitions of abuse and neglect. We'll go through the definitions, and we do have some pictures to share with you that will kind of show different kinds of injuries and different kinds of cases that we've dealt with in the past. And some of these are Josh and I's cases, and some are other workers. So just be prepared that there are. We don't have any truly graphic pictures of burns and things like that. We don't show those kinds of pictures. So let me first start with physical abuse. What do you guys know about physical abuse? What kind of cases would fall under physical abuse? Name me some things that you think would fall under that.
Shaking a baby.
Shaking a baby, yes, most definitely. Broken bones.
Scalding.
Burns. What would be more of a common one that we would see for physical abuse?
Hitting with a belt.
Bruises, typically, are going to be our most common. But abuse occurs when a caretaker creates or inflicts or threatens to create or inflict or allows to be created or inflicted upon a child. This is all in policy, so I didn't make up these words. A physical injury other than accidental means or creates a substantial risk of death, disfigurement, or impairment. And some of the types of abuses that you guys mentioned were there's asphyxiation, which is smothering, bone fractures, head injuries, which includes brain damage, skull fractures, hematomas, which are just large bruises and a pool of blood kind of underneath the scalp, burns, cuts, bruises, welts, abrasions, internal injuries, poisoning, sprains, dislocation, gunshot, stabbing wounds, Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Do you guys know what that is? Okay. That is when a parent or a caretaker makes a child ill on purpose. We recently had a case of a mother feeding a child milk of magnesia, which can be toxic, but giving her such large amounts that it started to shut down her organs. And this child had been ill from an early age and had had numerous operations. And at the time that we got involved, she wasn't walking, she had no muscle tone, and it was mainly due to this mother poisoning her child. And she admitted to it, which is very rare in Munchausen cases for them to admit to it. But on this case, the social worker did get an admission. And one of the ways that we've always been taught to how do you know it's Munchausen and not something medical is when you remove a child from an abusive situation, if it is Munchausen, they tend to get better. And they start to heal and regain function back that they didn't have. They no longer are sick. They're no longer needing doctor's appointments and things like that. There was a big famous case out in Florida. I don't know if any of you recall that one, but there was a big case down in Florida of a mother that actually got prosecuted for it. So it is.
Out of curiosity, this would happen just because the mother is mentally ill? Or
It is a mental illness. Yes, it is in the DSM-4. It is a mental illness. They call it factitious disorder in the DSM-4, but it falls on, it's Munchausen, what we would refer to as.
A lot of times, another sign of it will be that the caretaker or the mother is very educated on doctors and has shopped around for doctors and has researched illnesses, and it comes across as very intelligent regarding what illnesses their child has.
It's usually younger children as well, children who can't speak for themselves. Other types of abuse, physical abuse, are bizarre discipline. And this can be anything from a parent who makes their child kneel on rice for 3 hours, raw rice. We've got cases like that. We deal a lot with the military bases down in the Fort Belvoir area, and we get a lot of parents who are into giving their kids like physical discipline in the sense of like 1,000 push-ups and 1,000 jumping jacks, and it's just excessive to where these kids are it's what we would consider bizarre discipline. It's just excessive types of discipline. Battered child syndrome, which is a medical expert or has to diagnose this. Shaken baby syndrome, somebody mentioned that one. And then we also have a new one category that's recently been added to policy, which is exposure to sale or manufacture of certain controlled substances, which is like meth labs and things like that. Have you guys heard of coining or Mongolian spots? Okay, so sometimes things come in looking like abuse, but they're not. Fairfax County has decided, amongst themselves, is when we get a case of coining, which is mostly done in the Asian culture, or there's also cupping. There's another form of healing, but they believe it's a healing remedy they usually do it when their child is ill with a cold or fever and things like that, and they will rub like a hot coin on a child's chest or on their back. A lot of time you'll see it, and it ends up actually causing like a burn, like a rug mark kind of burn on a child. And we try not to take those cases unless a child is complaining that it's hurting them. We'll try not to take those and be culturally sensitive to that culture. Mongolian spots are typically they're seen on Hispanic and Asian families and African American families, and they are basically birthmarks, but they look like bruises. They're usually on the back and buttocks area, and they look like a really light purple bruise. And one of the easiest ways to know whether or not your child has Mongolian spots or if this is a case of a child with Mongolian spots, is to go back in a few weeks. They'll look exactly the same. There won't be no change to them. And we document injuries, and we do a lot of documentation of injuries and taking pictures to make sure that we've got the case, got the pictures in our cases, so we can refer back to the pictures that we just took to see if there's been any change. Also, Pediatricians can confirm that for us, so that's another way. Physical neglect. Oh, pictures. Let's go with physical abuse.
Now these are going to be all types of physical abuse cases that we've worked on, over the years, and some have come in as physical abuse and turn out to be something else. So we'll talk about what our process is during the investigation to make those determinations.
Looking at this picture, what do you think this is? What could it be? It could be a multiple of things. This was my case, by the way, and this is a 5-month-old little boy at Fairfax Hospital came in with this injury, and there was no explanation.
Is it a broken bone? What is it? What is it? Is it a bone or a bruise?
Well, I wasn't sure either what it was, and I had to rely basically on the medical field to help me with this one. But it looks like it could have been hit with something. It looks like it could be a broken bone, and it's just bruising this way. Turns out this little guy is hemophiliac, and anything could have caused this injury. If mom was holding him and bumped into the table, it would have caused this bruising to pool like this. And the way that they determined that he had hemophilia or a blood disorder, which hemophilia is, the inability to clot. And when they were putting in the IV to the baby, they also noticed that he bruised very easily, and he had a massive bruise on his arm, on his hand. And they ran further tests. And in a case like this, when there's still some testing being done, I'm going to kind of sit back on a case and wait for that I'm going to talk with the parents, of course, to try to get a timeline of who's been taking care of the baby and how things have been going. But at this point, I was still waiting on tests, and it turns out that it was a child with hemophiliac with a blood disorder. But again, when I arrived and I see this injury, the first thing that I want to think is that it's abuse, that somebody has injured this child, and that is not always the case.
We're very fortunate in Fairfax County as well and in Northern Virginia to have a specialized team of doctors at Fairfax Hospital, and it's a special group of forensically trained child abuse physicians. And we even have experts in child abuse x-ray examinations and things like that. So a lot of our cases go through that department, and we rely on them a lot to determine how valid they feel a particular injury is related to abuse. This was one of my cases, and this case, it's a 6-year-old little girl. It actually came in for medical neglect, and we'll go into that a little bit later, but you can kind of see the little circular spot below her underwear line, and she had severe eczema, and there was a concern in the community that mom wasn't treating it properly. So that's how it came in. And come to find out that mom, might have been lax on using the medication as prescribed. So my interventions with her were centered around using the medication regularly, talking with the pediatrician, making sure that she was taking this baby to the doctors. Also, part of our work is to document progress. So you can't really tell, but the eczema was actually healed up, and this was towards the end of my case. So since this was a young child and a female, me being a male worker, I brought a female coworker. I brought Joss with me to document her bottom and her legs, so I could close the case out that the eczema was healing up. I was out of the room, and Joss came back and got me and said, do you know that